Hello everybody, my name is Morgan Wasserman and I'm going to be discussing escape-maintained behaviors, specifically what we know about them in research, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about gaps and barriers in the field, and then kind of my ways to address those gaps and barriers. So escape-maintained behaviors are behaviors that someone uses to avoid or get out of doing something else. In our field, there are many different approaches to addressing these behaviors, and I'm going to kind of go into what these methods are, and I want to find solutions for gaps and barriers in these methods. So let's begin by discussing what we know about these problematic behaviors. To start, we know that problem behaviors occur within a certain context, right? We know that behaviors have antecedents, which happen immediately prior, and then consequences, which happen immediately afterward. And we know that consequences maintain behaviors, so manipulating consequences can change behaviors themselves. We also know that antecedents occur prior to behaviors, so manipulating antecedents can also change whether or not the behavior occurs, and to what extent that behavior occurs. We can look at patterns of these occurrences through functional analysis, which is a form of behavior assessment where we manipulate antecedents and consequences, and we determine their effects on the behavior that we're looking at. The field of applied behavior analysis has addressed all types of problematic behavior, not just escape-maintained behavior. And it's talking about, behavior that is socially significant that we want to change. We also know that these functional assessments, have been used to develop function-based interventions. So these interventions are chosen based on the function of the behavior that's been discovered through this functional analysis. We've also found that behaviors are escape-maintained are this way as a result of negative reinforcement, where the removal of something leads to an increase in behavior. So in the case of escape-maintained behavior, access to escape is negative reinforcement because you're removing the need to be in the area or engage in the desired task, which maintains this escape behavior. So someone will continue to try to escape if it means they won't have to engage in the task that you want them to engage in. It's also going to be important to discuss positive reinforcement because a lot of these methods involve that. Positive reinforcement can be provided in the form of attention or access to items, and it can also be socially maintained. Then I want to discuss extinction as well, which occurs when a behavior is not reinforced so that behavior no longer occurs. This sometimes comes with an extinction burst. So if you look at my graph right there, you can see right after the baseline, we have that immediate kind of upward slant right there, or upward line. And this extinction burst is an increase in frequency or intensity that immediately follows the removal of a reinforcer. And this comes into play for procedures where previously reinforced behaviors like escape aren't reinforced anymore. So in certain instances, if a child attempts to leave the room or engages in refusal more often at the start of a new intervention, this might be because their behavior had been previously reinforced, and that means it's maintained by escape. We also, if I go to the last slide, have differential reinforcement procedures, where appropriate responses are reinforced and other ones aren't. And this is important because when we're teaching new behaviors, as we reinforce what we're looking for, we're not going to reinforce behaviors that we don't want to see again. So let's talk about what the literature says. So when it comes to escape, the literature has evaluated a lot of specific methods. So some examples of behaviors targeted are feeding and compliance. Methods for addressing escape include escape extinction, which is effective for decreasing things like food refusal in conjunction with reinforcement or on its own. Other methods included positive reinforcement, which was an article from Carter 2010. My last one was LaRue et al. From 2011. And for this one, it's a way to eliminate maladaptive behaviors maintained by escape. And this study in particular from Carter targeted compliance. There are other methods that go alongside with these when addressing escape-maintained behaviors. So for example, you can use non-contingent reinforcement, which is that something specific doesn't necessarily need to occur before somebody gets that reinforcement on a fixed schedule. while contingent access reinforcement is when something must happen for someone to get that reinforcer. So for example, someone must engage in appropriate behavior to gain access to their reinforcer for their contingent access. An article in 2004 by Johnson showed the importance of this because rates of maladaptive behaviors decreased with non-contingent access to breaks. And then that article also showed the necessity of evaluating the schedule of reinforcement to make sure breaks were accessed on a fixed schedule. And then if you combine these concepts, another method would be to use differential reinforcement as a way to address extinction, which was shown in a study where they delivered immediate and longer duration access to high quality reinforcement after appropriate behavior was exhibited. And they also offered delayed and shorter duration access to lower quality reinforcement following those problem behaviors. So that was by Athens and Vollmer in 2010. And then to add on to this finding, other methods would be to use either non-contingent reinforcement or both non-contingent and differential reinforcement together to reduce maladaptive behavior maintained by escape. So that was from Fritz et al. In 2017. So research has also shown that there are ways to avoid extinction bursts, like evaluating reinforcement beforehand, from Kunavatana et al. In 2018. And you can use things like contingent access to breaks, which Waller and Higbee in 2010 found, but even more effective than that was non-contingent positive reinforcement in the form of edibles, which Slocum and Vollmer in 2015 found. So let's start to talk about gaps and barriers. We have to ask ourselves if we should or shouldn't use extinction. And there are so many differences in interventions, and we have to decide whether or not it's appropriate to use extinction. So these articles and the extreme variance in methods addressing escape-maintained behaviors show us that we're not all on the same page about how to address escape. Despite the fact that some methods have already been proven to be more effective than others, we're just not all on the same page. One thing to consider in the barrier of should we use extinction is in relation to ethics and morality. So we should ask ourselves if we should avoid extinction bursts, which occur when someone goes from experiencing those high levels of reinforcement to none. And then continue to engage in the behavior at higher levels and attempt to gain access to the reinforcer that they were previously gaining access to before fading out. So do we want to have these extinction bursts? That's an ethics question. Another question in relation to extinction bursts is related to this ethics question. So is it ethical to use them? Should we instead slowly fade out reinforcement, giving less and less at a rate the subject is more comfortable with to avoid these extinction bursts? Is it ethical to put someone through the emotional distress of an extinction burst, even if it might make therapeutic techniques easier or quicker to administer? And if it takes someone weeks to fade back reinforcement, but only one tantrum to learn that they won't receive reinforcement for the problem behavior, should we use this? So what do we choose? These are questions that we have to ask ourselves and all get on the same page about. The difference in opinions about ethics and extinction itself, as well as extinction bursts, contribute to this barrier in treatment methods. So another gap in the field is the generalization aspect. Can we use these concepts for other maladaptive behaviors, not just escape, as shown in compliance with other types of maladaptive behaviors in the article about compliance with feeding from LaRue et al. In 2011. So we want to know if these escape-maintained behaviors generalize to other populations. Can we generalize this to typically functioning adults, maybe in the workplace, or people who engage in escape-maintained behavior, like going to the bathroom or going to social media instead of going to do the work, or other types of behaviors? So not just these other contexts and these other locations, but also these other types of behaviors, not just maintained by escape. So what can we do about these barriers and gaps in the research? First, let's approach the differences in opinions about the ethics behind extinction bursts, which contribute to a barrier in treatment methods. So we have to establish common evidence-based practices, and we all need to get on the same page. So I wanted to say a personal example of when I worked under different BCBAs who all had different opinions about extinction bursts. I didn't know what to do. They all had different reasons why we should or shouldn't engage students or clients to the point where they engaged in these extinction bursts, and it was difficult to know what to implement. So some people say you shouldn't reinforce any maladaptive behavior regardless of the emotional struggle that might come with it. And others say that you should provide verbal attention and say things like calm hands and then praise those calm hands despite the attention that it provides. I tend to side with the first BCBAs that saying calm hands still provides attention, and that if you reinforce the appropriate response with the prompt, it's still providing attention to the behavior. But in general, my opinion doesn't really matter because we all just need to have a general standard for this. BCBAs need to get on the same page about this, possibly by discovering a way to reinforce alternate behaviors without providing attention to maladaptive behaviors, or things like that. And if we provide contingent reinforcement or social praise when the child has calm hands before they engage in aggressive behavior, we're not reinforcing an appropriate behavior change. So these are just things that lead back to establishing common evidence-based practices. They don't need to align with my opinions, but we do all need to be on the same page about them. And then this also goes into ethics. So there's so much literature, but there's a problem with BCBAs all having different opinions on how to appropriately address behaviors. So continuing education requirements definitely help with this, but I think it's crucial to have the BCBAs dive deeper into basic concepts and challenge themselves, either by collaborating and having them provide opinions on one another's programs or things like that. And something that could help is having CEUs an option be to compare behavior plans with one another for those BCBAs and provide feedback on those programs to ensure that everyone is on the same page with work and can learn from one another, not just the research. This also means establishing communities of practices with BCBAs and other professionals that work together as a team, and that we have these checks and balances to address the issue in the field. Because we have a lot of BCBAs engaging in different methodologies to address the same issue, and these checks and balances would definitely help with that. So last, let's approach the question of generalization to other contexts. We need to ensure that there's more research on the generalization of these strategies, or else they're only valuable when it comes to escape-maintained behaviors. So a suggestion for students would be to share research on evidence-based practices with BCBAs and to utilize knowledge from BCBAs. If students learn by asking BCBAs why they choose certain interventions, they can begin to make these choices on their own and even collaborate with these BCBAs to combine these interventions. Students can challenge BCBAs to determine if interventions are chosen from an appropriate repertoire of knowledge, or if they're just kind of taking the easiest thing from past experience and doing interventions based on what's comfortable for them. So as we've discussed, there's a lot of research on addressing escape-maintained behaviors, but with these solutions to the barriers and gaps in the field, hopefully we can begin to approach addressing these and have a unified approach to escape-maintained behaviors and how we can address them.